So a few weeks ago I received this Anet E10 from Gearbest as a review unit. The E10 comes generally well packaged. There are three main components in the package. The bottom with the bed attached to it, the Z carriage, and the electronics assembly over here. It requires fairly basic assembly. This Z carriage is going to need attached to the bed, and then there's pre-terminated wires that all get plugged into their various components. So the assembly is fairly straightforward. In the package you're going to find some directions. These are generally pretty terrible. Screwdriver, 20 meters of mediocre PLA, some bed material. It says 3M on the back. Seems kind of like Build Tech. I did not actually try this yet. Allen wrenches, some spare hardware, USB cable, a spare extruder, some zip ties, and a putty knife scraper tool, as well as an SD card and USB SD card reader. So this video is going to be more of a first look at the E10, as I feel like to give a comprehensive review I need to have the unit for at least a month or so and run more than 4 prints on it. So let's just give you an idea of what's in the box, what to expect, and my general overview of what you're getting for your money from Gearbest with this printer. So let's start with these directions. They have some basic information about the printer, a lot of different pictures, some general information in the back on troubleshooting, but in general I would avoid these. Because what I did is I began to assemble the printer using these directions. After opening the contents of the included SD card, I found that there are much better directions on there. There's actually a really good video that you can watch now. Some of the things I think are omitted are just some general checks you should probably do. As I found out, almost every belt on the machine was loose. Loose enough that there would have been problems. It's simple enough to adjust the tension on the belts, but it doesn't really go through like a preprint checklist. Now that's one thing I really like about my Prusa i3 Mark II, is that the directions are both very well documented. It has a very well documented startup routine, and it even has kind of a pre-check that you should go through. And the printer sort of forces you to go through that to get it started. This machine doesn't have any of those kind of baby steps to walk you through it. Now I've got enough experience with printers that getting it started was not that much of a challenge. It did take some time, and there were a few annoyances. One thing I actually found is that the wiring for the extruder, it is a Bowden extruder, and the wiring for the x-axis here were switched. So when I went to try to move each axis independently, which you should do when you first get a new 3D printer, just to make sure everything is wired correctly and hooked up and that everything can move freely, the Z-axis moved properly, the Y-axis moved properly, but when I moved the X, it wasn't moving, so I checked to make sure there were no zip ties in the way and nothing was obstructing it. I even shut it down and moved it by hand. I tried it again, and when I tried it this time, I was watching a little more carefully and noticed that the extruder drive gear was actually spinning while I was trying to move the X-axis. This was simple enough. The wiring connectors are exactly the same, and it required nothing more than me to switch the two connectors. The other thing I found is a lot of loose screws. When I first unboxed the Anet E10, the bed was actually quite loose, and I thought maybe this was done intentionally so that you could access something. So I looked through all the printed directions at the time, and even when watching the video later, found out that this was not done intentionally, and that the screws had just worked their way loose. In fact, they were just rattling around in the bottom of the box. It wasn't a big ordeal, but it did require me to remove the bed entirely with these 4 screws and then reattach the screws. Now they are simple Phillips head screws. I don't think that's a great choice for a fastening method for the bed to the bearings on the linear axis here. Just because you really can't get that much torque on a Phillips head screw. They'd be much better being an Allen socket head cap screw. So let's get to the printing. So a lot of printers today are coming with automatic mesh bed leveling or some sort of even manual bed leveling where it kind of walks you around and takes you through each step of leveling the bed. And if there was one thing I'd say that amateurs or first-time 3D printers don't get right very often is the bed leveling. So this printer complicates it even more in that the Z-axis limit screw is, at least as far as I can tell, fixed. There is no adjustment. The point that touches the Z-axis limit screw is also fixed. There's no adjustment there. So now you not only have to set the bed leveling, you also have to get your distance from your nozzle to your bed right at the same time. Many printers like my MakerGear M2 provide for an adjustment screw for the Z-axis separate from adjusting the actual bed leveling. So you can level the bed pretty quickly, get it in plane to the extruder, and then you can make a simple adjustment, your limit setting screw, so that you can make fine adjustments to that first level to get your perfect squish. Those two things, I would say, are two of the biggest things that new users to 3D printing mess up most frequently. One is not getting the bed level, and the second one, probably even more important, is getting the bed to the right distance from the nozzle to the bed. If you don't get those right, you simply aren't going to get your print to stick. And if your print doesn't stick, you're going to end up... Prusa i3 Mark II in comparison is much simpler to set up. It has the automatic mesh bed leveling, and it also has the live Z adjust. I tried to find something in the menu system of this that is similar to a live Z adjust, and as far as I can tell, it doesn't have it. If you found something or found a trick for adjusting that, I'd love to hear about it, because these Prusa style frames with 2 Z lead screws don't lend themselves very easily to making a quick adjustment. On my MakerGear M2, they actually include a knob on the top of the Z axis, and you can quickly grab that knob, override the Z stepper motor, and make very fine adjustments to your initial starting point. One of the most important features for me on my M2 is to quickly be able to make that adjustment. Sometimes I get my Z limit set screw set perfectly and things go great, but other times if I change out my bed surface, I decide I need to use painter's tape, those sort of things all require to make a small adjustment on that Z, and it's not simple to do on a machine like this where you don't have a great way to make a live adjustment. So you use these 4 screws on the bottom of the bed to pull the bed down onto the springs and set the bed leveling. I've found this bed to be flatter than I expected, considering that it is a very thin sheet of aluminum that doesn't look to be precisely machined. But I have not printed something very large in the X or Y axis which would really test that. So in the directions, it actually addresses this problem of adjusting the Z during the first layer, and what they suggest is actually moving these 4 screws under the bed. Besides being a little dangerous while the machine's moving, it is also very clunky. You really can't get to those screws quickly enough on a small print. On a large print, you probably have plenty of time to make some adjustments, but really getting them all adjusted evenly can be probably a challenge while the machine's running and you're trying to not get your fingers pinched and try not to burn your hand on the extruder or the heated bed. It's really not an ideal solution. So some of you probably want to know what you're getting for your $300. You're getting an A10 frame with 3D printed parts, belt drives, linear rails for your Y-axis. It does ride kind of on the 80/20 here in sort of a V-slot. This is not in fact V-slot. V-slot actually has typically a little eccentrics that you can adjust. This actually has, and it's kind of hard to tell, there's slots in the metal bracket that attaches this end of the carriage, so you can adjust the tension. You're also getting a large, if not kind of strangely shaped, build volume. It's 270 in the Y, 220 in the X, and 300 in the Z. This is a good sized bed, much larger than your average 3D printer on the market, but it misses, I think, a little bit where a lot of machines now are going to, on this bigger scale, are going to a 300 by 300 by 300 build volume. And I think many of you are probably going to compare this to the Creality CR10. I personally don't have any experience with the Creality CR10, and I think there are videos comparing this machine to that. The Creality CR10 is at least $100 more expensive than this model, at least at the current pricing. I think this machine is also missing some of the nicer features that I've seen in reviews of the CR10. I believe the CR10 comes with a glass or borosilicate build plate, where this is simply the aluminum build plate, aluminum heated build plate, and this build tack like cover for it. I'm personally a fan of borosilicate build plates. My M2 has one of those. It's very easy to clean, very easy to set up, generally very reliable. And another review of the Anet E10, I saw that it was mentioned that the belts were actually just rubber. If you take a close look, at least on the ones provided on my unit, there is actually reinforcement in them as well. Obviously, if they were just rubber, they could be prone to stretching over time, but these look to, at least on the x-axis here, have some reinforcement inside of them. So that's not necessarily a concern. Another issue I ran into with my machine is that the Z-axis stepper motors, I feel like they were maybe not installed in a way that makes sense to me. The connectors for the motors were turned towards the bed, where they would actually catch and bang onto the thumb screws for adjusting the bed leveling. So that was pretty simple. Just undo the two screws holding the Z-axis motor to the metal frame or metal mounting bracket for the Z-axis, and just turn it 90 degrees so that both connectors are facing along the frame and away from the bed. This is actually, with all the 3D printers I've run, this is actually the first Bowden machine. I guess the Mark IV is technically a Bowden machine, but this is one of the first Bowden machines I've used. In general, I found loading filament to be a little bit of a challenge. Partially, it's got this Bowden tube that goes into a push-to-connect fitting here. Getting the filament to line up with the extruder can be a bit of a challenge. Many times I'd have to pop this Bowden tube off and go ahead and manually align it and then push it in afterwards. After fiddling with it enough, I think I've got it lined up where it starts pretty reliably, but in general, I find it much more difficult to get started than a direct drive printer. I don't think that's the case on most Bowden drives, obviously. I think one thing you could do on this machine to eliminate a potential weak point is to upgrade to an E3D V6 on this. It wouldn't be too hard to use the same mounting plate and make a mount for that. And the E3D V6 has everything lined up very nicely, so that when you go to the push-to-connect fitting on the top, it would start very reliably. There would be no concerns there at all. So many of you are asking, what do I think at this point? In general, I'm very impressed with what you can get for $300. The electronics on it are very well terminated, other than the little mishap with the labeling. The control box looks very nice. It has a nice LCD display on it. The build volume is generous. The frame is quite sturdy for a $300 3D printer. I printed, as I often do, a hollow pyramid print. This in general turned out okay. There's quite a bit of sagging in the uprights or the corners of, almost lost it there. There's quite a bit of sagging in this portion of the print, and if you compare that to one that I printed, these are both printed in PLA by the way, one that I printed on the Prusa, you can in fact see that this is a much cleaner print. Now this is maybe a slightly challenging print, and a lot of it has to do with slicer settings. This machine uses an older version of Cura right now, or at least that's what they provided settings to me for. In general, I'm not a huge fan of Cura. I'm more of a Simplify person myself, and you guys can debate that all you want. But in general, I found Simplify to be easier to use and give a little bit better print quality. I have used Cura, and this older version of it, and the settings they provide, maybe, I think you could tune this, is what I guess what I'm trying to say here. So I think you could get better print quality by making some adjustments to the Cura profile. Also, I'm not sure, if you look at this, that the bed fan is very well aligned to where the nozzle is. I did have to change out the extruder after fiddling with it for a while. So in general, I don't think the fan is very well aligned to the extruder at this point. So this could have some effect on this, as you'll need some bed cooling to keep the layers from curling and warping up. The next print I attempted was one of these kind of interlocking vases. This turned out very good. This was run in vase mode from Cura. Model is from My Mini Factory. Link in the description for the video. Both of these parts were printed on the E10, and as you can see, they interlock as they're supposed to. This is just a particularly satisfying print. So next, my 4-year-old son chose the print, and we printed Bob the Minion here. This model is also on My Mini Factory. Now this is a very, very clean print, I think, for a $300 printer using the stock Cura settings that they provide on the SD card. Very little resonating. The only thing again is a little bit of sagging. There was support on here. A little bit of sagging on the bottom of the goggles. In general, that was going to be a problem area for most printers, I believe. But once again, very clean. Now this printer's stock settings are generally very slow. Their settings for PLA at 30 millimeters per second. That is half what the Prusa or my MakerGear M2 print PLA at. Both of those are up in the 50 to 80 millimeters. So what's next? I'd like to do a more thorough review for you guys. I would certainly like to try printing other materials, specifically ABS and PETG on this machine. I would also like to run some more complicated models, maybe try to set up a Simplify 3D profile for this machine, or even try a newer version of Cura. This is a very affordable machine that is lacking some of the usability features that some of the machines like the Prusa i3 Mark II has, with mesh bed leveling and Live Z adjust. I think both of those are very important features for a new user with 3D printing. You can add a borosilicate build plate to this machine for not a whole lot of money, but when you do that, you're going to be getting even closer to the price of the Creality CR10. If that borosilicate build plate is important to you, I would strongly consider you to consider the CR10. It has a bigger build volume, and it already comes with a borosilicate build plate. Beyond that, I don't have a whole lot of experience with the CR10 other than what I've seen reviews on. In general, it looks like a good machine. The CR10 currently, though, is on back order, or at least takes a few weeks to arrive, where this can arrive shipping almost immediately. It did arrive very quickly. I was pretty impressed with the shipping time. 4 years ago, I bought my first 3D printer. It cost me $1,500 and came as a kit. That was my MakerGear M2. I've been very happy with that printer. It's taught me a lot of things. I've learned a lot of things since then. I've used many 3D printers since then. Everything from the Mark Forged 3D printer that uses carbon fiber and reinforces your parts with continuous strands of carbon fiber, to a Uprint SE professional FDM printer, all the way down to my Prusa i3 Mark II that I'm very happy with. If you'd have told me back then that I could have bought a mostly assembled 3D printer for $300 now and get this kind of print quality, I don't think I'd have believed you. That's how far 3D printing has progressed in simply 4 years. I'm pretty impressed with that. Now, are there things I would say could be improved on this printer? Certainly. Would it be a good first 3D printer? Definitely. Are there better first 3D printers? Most certainly. But is this a good purchase at $300? I think you can do pretty well, especially with some of the discount codes that are available and the sales they run. I think this would be a pretty good first 3D printer. If you don't have a whole lot of patience for getting the bed leveling and tweaking and making all the adjustments, certainly consider spending a little bit more money. Look at maybe a Prusa i3 Mark II or something else that has a little bit better documentation and better setup and initialization type stuff for getting things leveled and all that. But I don't think you can go wrong with this right now. But what I think is most impressive is how far we've gotten in 4 years. Now, is the Anet E10 perfect? Certainly not. But where are we going to be in the next couple years? This is amazing that they've come down to this kind of price and you get this much functionality built into a printer. I hope to do a little bit better analysis on this printer, get some more feedback, or do some more testing on it, and hopefully I can get another review out shortly with more specifics on how I actually really like it and give you a solid recommendation. At this point, if you got $300 and you want to buy a 3D printer, this is certainly something you should consider. At least a year ago, when my friend purchased an affordable 3D printer at around this range, his kit required a lot more assembly, and in general, I think the parts included with it were not necessarily of this quality. So it's impressive what's going on in the 3D printing industry today. If you like this video and you like my content in general, please consider subscribing. It really helps me out. I really enjoy making these videos, and hopefully I can get some more content out soon. Thanks.